Thank you all for coming. I'm Mary Ann Danielson from Creighton University, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning in Communication, Stability and Change from Our Early Beginnings to 2014, otherwise known as our 5 Years Out panel. Our opportunity, I think, to explore... When they selected these themes for the conferences, I know they do it years in advance, but I don't know how prophetic this was, because I think if you look at our recent election and things, we've heard lots about change, and yes, we can do some things. And it was kind of with that mentality, although I was drawing upon an earlier scholar, if you will, or earlier politician, Mahatma Gandhi, who said, be the change you want to see in the world. And it was kind of that thought process that guided the construction of this. So let me, as I get ready to introduce the panelists, give you a little sense of what our plans for this session actually are. We wanted to be true to modeling what is good scholarship of teaching and learning, in that we want to then take some of our communicative social work and make it public, subject ourselves to critical evaluation of each other and where we are and where we want to be, and most importantly, actively foster conversations that guide significant, long-lasting learning for all. And as I thought about where do we want the scholarship of teaching and learning to be 5 years out, it really is a matter of what we want to make of it. So I invite you to participate in this kind of socially constructed, co-constructed reality of where we want to be, and toward those ends, we'll actually do some focused group work. To guide us and to get us started, though, to prompt our thinking, I have a panel of individuals who have been central to and instrumental in advancing the scholarship of teaching and learning, particularly within the communication discipline, that's going to give us a little background thinking to help you guide our conversations. Oftentimes you'll hear great ideas, and to take notes, you should have been given, or I have extra sheets, some color-coded sheets, because as we look forward, not to get us into too much of a strategic planning process, but I want us to think a little bit about what are our opportunities. How can we move the scholarship of teaching and learning in new directions? Please, Erwin, would you help out, pass out some of those? And then the second sheet are challenges. What are some of the things that may preclude us from getting to where we want to go? And most importantly, what are some of the resources that we can use, leverage, and share to help us in what we're doing? So again, I invite you, as you hear the comments from the panelists, to jot down your ideas, and after their opening comments, we'll break up into some focus group discussions for some sharing and collect the information back, with an idea being that we will begin to build an agenda for our division over the next 5 years. And to get us started, I can think of no better individuals than the one seated to my right. We're going to start off with Carolyn Calloway Thomas from Indiana University, who's going to talk a little bit about how she got started in the scholarship of teaching and learning and our early connections to the Carnegie Foundation.
Thank you. And good afternoon to all of you. In 1998, when the Carnegie Academy for the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning launched the Carnegie Scholars Program to support the work of faculty members from across the spectrum of disciplines, exploring questions about the teaching and learning of their disciplines, communication was absent, invisible, not there. However, by 2000, largely through the work of mine and our colleague, Sherry Moriarty, who was at NCA at the time, CASTLE became more capacious, and 3 communication scholars were chosen in 2001. That was, for me and for the discipline of communication, a signal moment for 2 major reasons. First, communication joined the national conversation in our efforts to develop the scholarship of teaching and learning. It meant that our disciplines would join other disciplines: history, English, biology, sociology, law, health, and other areas in the great work that needs to be done in bringing the recognition and reward to the scholarship of teaching and learning. It was a segue for us to meet with people from other disciplines. For example, the year that I was a Carnegie Scholar, the 3 communication scholars, Nancy Russo, Barbara Gale, and myself, interacted with scholars from biology, literature, physics, French, and Spanish. As a matter of fact, we were divided into cohort groups, and each cohort group involved several disciplines. And I thought that was a marvelous opportunity for all of us, because we were able to learn how pedagogies could be shared and fostered universally. And one of the things that people at the Carnegie Foundation have often said is that we've often had these fiefdoms, these compartmentalized disciplines where people talked past each other, in some instances not even to each other. So while I was at the Carnegie Foundation, we taught our cohorts a great deal, and they taught us a great deal about possibilities for the unification of knowledge and understanding how classrooms can be sites for systematic inquiry and how we could use the various disciplines, concepts, and methods to explore teaching and learning. And this is the second reason why Carnegie scholars in our discipline matter. Nancy Russo of the University of Kansas investigated the role of relational communication and learning online, and I focused my research on an area that once upon a time mattered a great deal in the discipline of communication and in the discipline of pedagogy, and that was stories, proverbs, poems, what I call representative illustrations in fostering student learning. And in 2000, I was at a conference on rhetoric in the 21st century at Jyväskylä, Finland. And there I participated in a conversation that literally stopped me in my tracks. It was something that I had been thinking about for a very long, long time as I made my transition from where I was as a graduate student to where I was as a faculty member. And so at that particular conference, and there were people from Poland, from the United States, from Russia, from Norway, as I recall, from many places. And I raised the question, is it possible today to teach students well if there are almost no allusions to which we can refer? And everyone in that group said we're having a difficult time trying to reach our students because our students happen to be at one place and we happen to be at another. Today, as a result of new technologies, the rise of popular culture, and intergenerational differences, teachers have to revise their understanding of how to reach students across the assigned texts, if indeed we have texts at all. My Carnegie project focused on unraveling such a challenge. I wanted to know to what extent were representative illustrations employed in the classroom as tools for enhancing student learning. And I wanted to know what was the nature and content of such illustrations. And I will not take the time right now to talk about some of the findings. Underlying my investigation, however, was a pedagogical and civic principle that struck not only at the heart of what we do, but at the heart of what our country can do. How, for example, do we sustain community if there are almost no common allusions to which we can refer? And I'm fond of saying, if we don't have common allusions, we normally have to start every conversation anew because we have to get people in touch with the ideas that we are talking about. So I thought that was a very important issue to address. So then the very idea of documenting and sharing the work of teaching and learning, a core principle of a scholarship of teaching and learning, has advanced our discipline in a lovely way. Our work is being publicized in communication journals, but not enough, however, at both the national and the international level. One of our Carnegie scholars, Barbara Gale, is now the treasurer of the International Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. And there have been other contributions. Some of us are still participating in some of the subtle work, and my colleague here has invited me to come to Creighton University. I was there last year, and I think one of the most dramatic and compelling and important things that is happening now is that we are able to communicate with people across disciplines so that when we are on an airplane, in a drugstore, in a grocery store, and people ask us, what is it that you do? I find that that question is being asked not as much as it once upon a time was asked. And I think that is a result of the work of people assembled here, as well as especially the work of Sherry. Morielli. I cannot say enough about the work that Sherry has done on our behalf. And I recall a few years ago that we actually, under the auspices of the National Communication Association, organized a national conference. And there were people from psychology. Supported by, yes. But there were people from all kinds of disciplines, and I do think that had a lot to do with the fact that we could organize under the auspices or the umbrella of the National Communication Association. So we're not where we ought to be, but we have begun.
Right. And as you heard Carolyn speak, you probably sensed there are some opportunities that lie ahead, but perhaps also some obstacles that we can begin to explore a little bit later. But as we move from kind of the individual experience, because the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, while driven oftentimes by individuals who have studied this or have gone through the Carnegie program, they ultimately came back to campuses and started developing critical masses that have then influenced us at the institutional and even the system-wide level. And somebody who's led one of the more successful efforts of that is Renee Myers from the University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee, who's been involved in with the Wisconsin System project, but I'll let her speak to that.
Yeah, I'll just talk. This is loud, but he told me to talk right into it. So I'll talk just a little bit about what we've been doing in Wisconsin, and then if you have questions afterwards, I can talk to you more. In about 2003 or so, we decided to do a system-wide Scholarship of Teaching and Learning initiative, and in the UW system, we have 26 campuses. And we have campuses across the board. We have 2-year campuses, we have 4-year comprehensive campuses, and we have graduate-level PhD campuses. So we're working with campuses, all sorts of campuses, and we decided that we would try and infuse the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning in all of those campuses. Now, I do want to say that we have centralized faculty development in the UW system. So we were working with a base, and I really think that's been instrumental in the success that we've had. They have a pot of money, and they gave some of that money to develop this Scholarship of Teaching and Learning initiative. And I took over as the coordinator, and we call it the coordinator of the leadership side for the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning for the UW system. And I'm going to talk a little bit about where we were and where we are now and where we still need to go. When we first started, hardly anybody knew what the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning was. So we spent a year traveling around to all these campuses and talking to provosts and to directors of teaching and learning centers and to any faculty who would listen to us about what it was and how you might go about doing it. I think that at least got us started down that road in terms of trying to sort of infuse it into the system. And then the second thing we did is we decided that any grants that came out of my office or the larger faculty development office would only go to projects that had a Scholarship of Teaching and Learning sort of focus. So that also helped to get people started on that. And then over the course of, so I said 2003 we started, so we're in our 6th year. So over the course of those 6 years, there's been a real development of teaching and learning centers on campuses, and those people, the directors of those people, of those centers have also done some work on the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. So, having said all of that, I think today I don't have to anymore go out and tell people what the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning is. Not that everybody knows what it is, but there's a lot of faculty who do. There's quite a few provosts who do. There's a few chancellors who do. But more importantly, there's a pretty good set of faculty on all these campuses that do. So now what I can do from my office is to develop initiatives that go beyond the what is it to initiatives where, for example, this term I'm working with a set of faculty from across the system and disciplines. These are interdisciplinary and intercampus on integrative learning. What is that? What does it mean to do integrative learning? What do students think integrative learning is? Do they think there is integrative learning? All of those kinds of things. And we're also working on some things on threshold concepts. So I can move up a level now to actually have them developing projects. And also doing workshops on things like gathering evidence and analyzing data now, instead of what is a good SOTL research question. Across the system, I think communication scholars have been very active in the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning in the UW system. Some of our directors of teaching and learning centers, and sitting right over here is one of them, is out of the area of communication. Personally, I think our field is just a natural match to doing the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. We have all the tools I think we need to do this well. And so I think we really have been and should continue to be leaders in this effort. I'll just say one other thing that we've done out of our system, and that's the CASTLE initiative just recently. We just finished it. We worked with a set of 5 systems across the U.S., and these systems were University of Colorado Boulder, CUNY, Miami-Dade, North Carolina, and then Wisconsin. And Wisconsin was the sort of lead system. And we tried to bring all of those systems together, which was hundreds of campuses, and to talk about how can we do this at the system level. It wasn't as successful as I think we wanted it to be, because we actually wanted to develop a project that could be done on all of these systems and all these campuses, and had to sort of concede that that was impossible. But we did do quite a bit of work in face-to-face meetings, sharing resources, virtual meetings, and sharing ideas, and so I think that was useful as well. But Carnegie now no longer has that initiative, so we just finished that, so we're not going to be going down that road anymore. And Carnegie has kind of given this now over to, I think, the International Society for the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, which would be great to see more communication people involved in that conference as well. We have some, but it would be great to see more. What are we going to do in the future? Well, we need to continue to work with this, but my thinking is we need to try to foster more international collaboration. I think that there's Scholarship of Teaching and Learning is being done in lots of places. We're not reading their work, they're not reading our work, but I think there's some really, really good work being done in Europe, in Asia, and I would like to see us try to work with that a little bit more. Now, I have a colleague in England who says to me, well, I'm not sure that's going to really work because our systems are very different. The way we think about education is different, and I think that's true. But I still think there are some basic teaching and learning questions that probably would benefit from an international sort of focus. The other thing, and then I'm going to end, the other thing I think we need to spend a little more time on, and I've tried to work on this, but I haven't done it as well as I should, is to bring in some of the disciplines that are still a little bit absent, like fine arts is one of those. And so I'm going to try to see if we can't bring in some of those other disciplines as well. So that's sort of where we were, where we are, and where we'd like to go. Thanks.
Okay. The next speaker would have been Tony Ciccone, the CASTLE director, and he is, maybe not unfortunate in his perspective, he's actually back at the Carnegie Foundation. He got called back for a meeting, so he's not able to be here. So by way of transition, if you will, and then we'll begin to look at what some of this means in terms of our own disciplinary history with SOTL. Tony could talk a little bit, though, about as the CASTLE or the Carnegie Foundation program is kind of ending, as we talk about stability and change, that is changing, but we do have new opportunities available. The International Society for the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning is now going into its 7th year as a formal organization. There have been some other things that have come out of the Carnegie Foundation's work in terms of conferences. Alan Altany has the SOTL conference. I'll tout Creighton University has a Faculty Development Summer Institute. There's some other opportunities where I think we can continue to resource each other in ways to form community. And I think Tony would have commented, because he asked to me privately, about the central role that he's been impressed in that communication. While it may have been absent at one time, since it started, part of it goes back to Carolyn and Tracy Russo and others work in this area. When they think about which disciplines are doing this, they think about physics, they may think about sociology, but communication, I can assure you, is one of the early disciplines that they look at. And part of that, and you've heard this alluded to already, is because of the early and excellent work done by Sherry Moriali in identifying this as an area of study and something that is important enough that it needs to be recognized within the National Communication Association structure. So to talk a little bit more about SOTL and communication and NCA, we have I don't know, at least in our cluster, we always think of Anita Salem from Rockhurst as kind of the instead of godfather, the godmother of the Sodal. So I'm going to get in trouble already. But okay, what I view as a okay, I'm going to stop then. As somebody that I look up to tremendously as an inspirational individual and really central figure in our discipline, Sherry Moriali.
Oh, you are so kind. You are all just so kind. And I similarly feel that way about my colleague and friend, Jim Applegate. So I would take all of those praises and also bring them to his doorstep. Thank you all for being here. I'm glad to be here and glad that we are. I'm glad, even though there aren't a lot of us here, I'm glad this conversation is continuing to happen. And that's what matters. And I was on one program this morning that someone said, Zen says that everyone is there who should be there. So darn it, we're here. And so my topic that I can talk about briefly it's three things. It's Sodal, it's communication, and it's NCA. And so for the NCA piece of it, I would just pick up little pieces of what you said and trace through some of our history and then think about that nexus of Sodal and communication, which we all know is very real. That's a very real nexus. And what do we do with that and how do we do it best? So, first of all, our history. And our history evolves, like you said, Carolyn, from the late 1990s and 2000. I was at a conference with Bill Eadie, and there was a big program, and it was, Barbara Hutchings. Pat Hutchings. Pat Hutchings was presenting, and she was talking about the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. And in the program, I think it was an AHE meeting, it said, and there is money available for disciplines. Well, I'm on that, right? There's money for disciplines. And it's about the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. Well, that money should be coming to us. And I look at the names of the disciplines, I said, you forgot someone really important. And I went over, it's enormous, big, because it was so big then. And I said, you don't know, but we ought to be in there. And we have people who are doing this work, and they're really doing it well. So, who are you? I said, well, I'm from NCA, and we're communication, and we should be communication scholars. And she said, well, that doesn't happen again for 2 years, but we do have small grants. And so we got a small, together, you recall, Jim, we put together a team, and we wrote a knock your socks off grant proposal because we really took it seriously. And we got just a small amount of money. But that didn't matter as much as being in touch and them knowing us and us knowing them. And then when it came around time to say who are the disciplines from which communication scholars can be selected, that was the challenge. You couldn't have even applied.
No, absolutely.
No. They were like, well, and I waited nervously. They said, yes, communication is in there. And then we had good people, and they applied, and we were off and running. And then for several years thereafter, while they still had money, oh, what a shame, it went away. We did many good things at that time. Of course, the wonderful Carnegie scholars whom you mentioned. I also worked with Mary Huber, and I heard you all talking about the multidisciplinary nature of the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, and that's really true. And I worked with Mary Huber on a volume called Disciplinary Styles in the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, with communication being highlighted in there, which was a good thing, as it should be, as we know it should be. I think our journals, part of another result, as I look back historically, I think our journals are far more disposed, subtly disposed, including communication education. And of course, our work is welcomed in the journal on the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. So I think we have publication venues now available to us as a result of all of that work. I well remember, Jim, that you started Scholarship of Teaching and Learning as being a main theme of your national convention. And it stayed. Now we continue to have panels and programs, etc. So that was a very good thing. Then that's good history, and you've all mentioned other things we have been doing, but then we say, okay, where are we now and where ought we go? And because there are only a few of us, I can speak with some candor. Yes, we know about the natural relationship of what we do to the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. Teaching is a communicative act. And so therefore we bring something to this table. To illustrate that, I just reviewed the top papers in the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning panel right before this. And the thing that I said to them after saying what was good and what could be improved about each paper was that what I did notice, what stood out for me was something that you mentioned, Carolyn, communications major contribution with regard to Scholarship of Teaching and Learning to the overall educational enterprise. We have a lot to give because teaching is a communicative act. And these 4 papers, tell me if you think these are discipline specific. One was about online teaching and how to use communication to get students engaged. That's multidisciplinary, isn't it? Multidisciplinary. Another one on the language and the discourse surrounding the teaching of math, and I would add statistics, right? That's multidisciplinary. It's COM and math coming together, and that's a challenge for the Academy, not just for COM. One on diversity, and one on the use of humor in the classroom and how to use it really well to influence the credibility of the teacher. Mm-hmm. So all of these are communication studies. All of these are Scholarship of Teaching and Learning studies. That's what we have to bring to that common table, and it's extremely valuable. So therefore, this work must continue. And thank God you all are doing it. I mean, that's the really good news, that you may be small and mighty today, but you continue and you hang in. And so then I say, well, what could we do? I appreciate your suggestion. Of course it should be international because we live in a global world, and I was just in Spain and then in China, and we want to do all these exchanges, right? And I agree with that. But I also, in looking at the papers and giving feedback, I noticed that they are papers about teaching, right? They're papers about communication and teaching. And we have continuously said in this initiative that we need to be as well respected as the basic researchers. I mean, we need to be as valued, etc. Well, that means our research needs to be as solid. And they were good conceptually. They were like, God, each one, I was like, this is such a great topic. But there were some holes in the method. They weren't quite what they should be, given what fine studies they were. They needed just a little bit of tweaking to push them over the top. So I think that it would be good to begin to bring more rigor to this type of research, so that there's nothing about it that is questionable in any way. I would like to see that begin to happen as we would move forward. And so I do have a handout, but here's one of your quotes. Are you ready? The key to success in higher education is a lot like success in ice hockey. It's not being able to skate to where the puck is. Rather, we need to be skating to where the puck will be. And I like that one. I remember that one, and I like it. And I think that's maybe we need to think really outside the box about the kinds of projects and the kinds of work these scholars will do that are studies for the day after tomorrow, not just tomorrow, and that they are rigorous studies. So that we really get out there again.
I'm hearing lots of opportunities, things that we can be thinking about and planning for. But as communication scholars, we also know that there is no meaning without context, and part of the context is higher ed. And as we continue to bridge, as you said, not just internationally, but with other associations, that's an opportunity for us to inform of them of what they're doing, but also to learn and to put some of our best practices forward. So to talk a bit about that is going to be Brad Mello. We'll talk about the importance of NCA partnering with educational associations, and he's with the National Communication Association.
Thank you. I think my remarks probably have as much relevance to folks interested in assessment as well as scholarship of teaching and learning. And I wanted to focus specifically on a partnership that I'm working on now with the American Association of Colleges and Universities. I don't know if you're very familiar with the association, but they have a project now called the LEAP Project. And the LEAP Project is Liberal Education for America's Promise. And it began with an interesting little survey that they did where they looked at what are the skills that employers are looking for when somebody graduates from college. Turns out a liberal arts-based general education, which communication is clearly a part of, produces those skills in students. And so they developed a LEAP project around that with the idea of promoting liberal education in general. And so I had the opportunity to work on a part of that program, which is Rubric Development. And they have a variety of rubrics, which, if you're looking for a rubric, they're available on their website for free download on all 11 different areas that a liberally educated individual should have. 4 of them, I think, have direct relevance to communication discipline as a whole. Oral communication skills, critical thinking, teamwork, diversity, or intercultural awareness. That last one is really interesting because employers clearly said they want graduates with diversity, recognition, and awareness. So I worked on the oral communication rubric team, and we spent about a year going back and forth. We would do a rubric, then we would send it out to test campuses who would use it to evaluate oral communication, and then they would give us feedback. And we went through about 3 rounds of that, working on that. And so now the rubrics are developed and published, and they're available. So that work has since then turned into, I've been invited on behalf of NCA to join with them in developing the next step of this. And here's when I think some significant research questions are going to come into play. And I think AAC and you will be leading some of this, and I think that we should be aware of this as well, is do these rubrics actually adequately measure student learning? And so we have things, we've all seen different kinds of rubrics. So we have something like in the oral communication, is the piece organized? Did the person give a well-organized speech? Well, does this rubric actually let us know that they know how to do that? Or did somebody just mark 4 or 3? Are the rubrics actually an adequate measure of doing that? The nice thing is, speaking of where the puck will be, AAC&U seems to be stepping in the shoes of AH&E in some ways, and they have some money. So we hope to be a part of the continuation of the LEAP program and bring in some money to NCA to do some of this kind of research, in particular working on do rubrics actually adequately measure them. And then beyond that, once we find this information, how do we take that information that we learned from a rubric and improve our courses and our curriculum? It's not just simply a measurement of student learning, but does that come back in that final feedback loop where we go, well, we haven't been doing this. Our courses need to be doing X or Y or whatever. And so that's, I think, the one of the directions to go. There's certainly other associations that we need to be partnering with, but I think AAC&U is a premier one. And as an aside, something that when Renee, you mentioned the idea of international collaboration, Betsy Bach and I had the wonderful, wonderful opportunity to present in Havana, Cuba at Fairfax. And we presented the results of her presidential task force on the undergraduate student guidelines. And there's certainly, Fairfax is the Latin American NCA, for lack of a better way of saying it. And that partnership is developing, and we hope to work with that further. There's a bit of a language barrier, obviously, but they're interested in the same kinds of questions that we're interested in terms of how do we bring our students to where we want them to be, and what's the best way to go about it. And there are countless communication scholars, countless graduate students. It was amazing to see at least 1,000 graduate students mulling around this conference, interested in the study of communication, and that we had an opportunity to interact with them. So I think I wholeheartedly endorse that idea, and I think we do need to pursue that.
Well, we've been doing all of the talking, and perhaps that's what you like, or perhaps you've seen in some other panels, but the intent of this panel is to actually make this much more of a dialogue. We had planned to break into small groups, and each of the panelists would serve as a facilitator. I think given our numbers, it would make more sense for us to have a conversation together. So if you're more comfortable, rather than even subdividing, I will take on the heavy task of recording so that all of you will be able to participate. But if we could begin to think about, and now, Renee, I'm going to turn you over then to the time person. Make sure about it the last 6 to 8 minutes we won't need to report out as much, but that we get a chance for final thoughts. Renee is excellent in charge of timing, so I'm going to put her in charge of that. I'm going to
the time.
There you go. I'm going to use the very nice stand that Brad, as long as I don't cut Carolyn off here. And what I'd like to do then is just to go back to, as we move forward, I think oftentimes we tend to look at, well, we need more money, or we need X, or we need Y.
We need another grant.
Since you ended on assessment, when I think about faculty and assessment, that's what I always hear. Well, we could do it if, and then there's like 18 things that they need. So let's not start there. Let's start with where are we in terms of opportunities. We've heard, I think, a lot of good things. Some initiatives have occurred. Let's start with where we are and build from our strengths. Some might call it in strategic planning the low-hanging fruit. You can call it whatever metaphor you want. Let's look at what those opportunities are. Then realistically spend some time looking at what are the challenges as we move forward. What are some of the things we're going to need to plan for, around, with, whatever the case may be. And finally end with maybe a little bit of brainstorming of what are the resources? What connections do we have? Knowledge communities, resources, journal outlets, new partnerships, virtual partnerships that might actually help us overcome those challenges, and try to compile a list so as we move forward. My intent is to submit, not at 5 o'clock, but in the near future, a list of items of things that we're discussing and are interested in that might serve as an agenda for future topics and future insights. Again, begin to move us systematically toward where we want to be, or where we think the puck will be in 5 years. And
see, everybody likes that.
That's it. And perhaps there might even be some funding, I don't know if there's a pot of gold, but maybe some funding that could be near that puck as we move toward that. So I've talked long enough now in terms of warming you all up. And I don't care, we can bounce back and forth, but I'm going to turn here first. What were some things that struck you in terms of opportunities? Sodal in the future, what does it look like? What are you excited about?
Can we categorize this not just as opportunities, but as strengths?
Yes, we can.
Is that okay?
Yes, we can. Strengths.
Because I like to focus on what are the strengths of communication in this area, along with what opportunities are sitting around out there.
I was trying not to sound too SWOT-ish. Some people don't like SWOT analyses, but we'll put them together. It's the same thing. Strengths and opportunities. What do we bring to the table? Why should people want to work with us? Why do they? Lori.
Well, I think one of the things we bring to the conversation is the focus on learning, and our communication perspective informs that, and that we see teacher-student in relationship, co-creating, meaning, and connected to that is that I just heard that same kind of language and discussion during the 5-year out panel in instructional development. And so even as I see us, and maybe I'm stepping ahead to your 3rd page or something, needing to have a separate identity, I wonder if it may be time to explore our connections again with instructional development and the kinds of things that are occurring there, for example, in critical studies.
Mm-hmm. Hold on to that thought so I don't lose it when
I can't. It's gone.
It's just a paper report. Focus on learning.
And then along with that, one of the things that shouldn't get lost, I think all the submissions we've had for the solo group this year, and especially the top papers panel, is that communication has important things to say about both the T and the L in solo. We have important things to say about the practice of teaching.
Right.
And I think, like I went to the Summer Institute at Creighton last year, and so many of the people from other disciplines had this laser-like focus on student learning as opposed to also looking at practice of teaching. And I think you need both of those because teaching is the instrument through which learning happens. And so exploring ways of doing that remains important.
Thank you. Others? Otherwise,
Well,
again, I don't want to preclude the panelists either.
No, I was just saying, I
We were
was
waiting
struck
our
by
turn.
the whole notion of our discipline having both the substance and the content and the skills out of which to craft things for the 21st century.
Yes.
Things that all students, whether they're international students or national students, need.
Say some of those that you're thinking of.
One of them in particular, I think, to mention it, I'll maybe say them in a different way. I think that people need to be able to think articulately, speak articulately and think critically and write cogently. But for me, one of the most important skills, and this is a challenge that we have, is the whole notion of decision making and problem solving. I think this is the issue of the 21st century, from my perspective. And I think it's critical primarily because when I look at things that are happening to people economically and from an educational perspective, a lot of those things derive, I think, from the fact that people don't make those robust and informed decisions that they need to get on with their lives. And one of those is in the area of health. We need to talk about how does communication facilitate not only learning things in the classroom, but also learning things outside the classroom that create social change. And I'm thinking in particular of Indianapolis, Jim. I just picked up some statistics about the dropout rate for African American students in Indianapolis. 60% of students in Indianapolis, African American students, and I think Latinas are in there, do not graduate from high school on time. That is unconscionable from my perspective. So I'm asking myself, what is it that we as a discipline can do to help people learn how to love learning?
Go ahead.
No, I was thinking of opportunities a little bit differently, not so much in terms of discipline specific, but it seems to me if you look at the terrain of higher education right now, there's enormous interest in learning outcomes. You have the voluntary system of accountability, which is most everything I name here we fund, so pardon me from thinking longer to fund. But with Gates, we've just launched a similar but different program for community colleges around learning outcomes. There's a lot of interest right now in looking at internationalization, the Bologna process in Europe. The key there to me, and go back to Brad's point about AEC and you was trying to do is, so you say the scholarship of teaching and learning. What I think the first question that what these people are asking is, what is it the students are supposed to be learning? I mean, I think the scholarship of teaching and learning is just everybody out there picking an outcome. And thinking, well, I wonder how that works. I don't think you're going to build a lot of momentum. But I think if you can link, so the question becomes, assuming that we can begin to identify what it is we think students in college, and I agree the high school college connection is equally important here, but what is it that they're supposed to know and be able to do when they graduate? How is that, or not, is that aligned, or is that not aligned with the demands that would be placed upon them as people working, employability, as people, citizens? And then you begin to think about, well, then how do you teach that? I mean, how do you understand what works? And to Sherry's point about methodology, I think that goes everywhere from the largely qualitative type things that you saw on the panel to we've got enormous work now being done in looking at the brain. And we can actually get down to looking at what fires and what doesn't fire and what's working and what's not. That's like cognitive science work is extremely relevant here. But if you can connect to this, and I do think, communication, and it's not just about, Brad mentioned the communication outcomes in the AAC. I think what you all were saying was, we have something to contribute about how this works, not just to learn communication skills. They're on all the lists, it's there. And even there, it's not about the gen ed, it's not about learning communication. It's about how do you create a biologist who can communicate biology and science? How do you create an economist or et cetera? So, and how does that happen? How do you integrate that in an effective way, that learning, so that it grows and develops up through the disciplines? So I do think communication, that's why we thought that from the outset, has a broad role to play in helping think about that. But as far as opportunities, I'm babbling on here, but I do think there's an enormous interest right now across a broad array of players in higher education around this concept of learning. So I think it's important, this is a duh statement, but it's important that the scholarship of teaching and learning be connected to this work on learning. Now, the first steps in a lot of this is defining the learning. Now, there's some resistance to that. It's like, well, my students learn this and your students learn that. But I don't think that's acceptable anymore. I think the folks on the other end of the continuum who are employing our students, the people who are out there, they're saying, wait a minute, surely there's a set of learning outcomes at ACMU, and we work with ACMU, they work with our work with the Bologna process, which has been a decade-long effort in Europe to get at this. So if we can connect to that kind of work, BSA, and the issue of opportunity gaps for low-income and minority students. I mean, Kevin at the University of Wisconsin, they're part of an initiative, which we also fund, called Access to Success. Yeah. He's committed, as the head of the University of Wisconsin system, to have the gaps in the minority student achievement in the University of Wisconsin by 2015, as have 24 other system heads representing 1 million plus students. Yeah. Well, I mean, and his name's been in the New York Times and a list of folk who said they were going to do that. Well, we started that a year and a half ago, and it's now 2009, soon to be 2010. How are we doing? Well, to the extent you can link to some of this kind of work,
sure.
Can the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, through looking at learning styles and how different people learn, and cultural issues and other things, can we help with that issue? So I'm always trying to think about, this in itself is important, but to the extent you can link it to these other things that are in progress. College completion. I'm so excited now that everybody from the President of the United States on down is talking about college completion. We talked about access for decades. And we gave a lot of people access to, what we gave them access to were loan debt and a sense of failure. Because, our college graduation rates, it's not as bad as the Indianapolis high schools, but our college graduation rates aren't, in many instances, aren't a lot of nothing to write home about.
They are not.
And particularly for low-income, students of color, first generation. And the one other thing out here, adult learners. I mean, there's increasing, I think the word's getting out. In 38 states in this country, they can't possibly be competitive economically with their youth population. They don't have enough kids. I mean, Wisconsin could take every baby born between now and 2025 and make sure every one of them graduated with a degree from the University of Wisconsin, and Wisconsin would not be where it needs to be in 2025 to be competitive on a national, much less international scale. So you got all those adults out there, a lot of them without jobs now, but even those with jobs, and they want to come back. We're seeing enormous interest in adults recognizing they've got to come back. Well, what about teaching adults? How do you do that effectively? Do you teach an adult? Does an adult learn the same way as an 18-year-old student who just graduated from high school, is living in a dorm and has a residency? I don't know. Maybe I don't think so. So scholarship of teaching and learning can help us understand how we create an adult learner-focused approach around learning. So I'll stop. But I think those kinds of issues are so important, and they're getting so much attention. You've got the outcomes, college completion now. I mean, soon, Carnegie's not here, but Carnegie and Lumina and Gates and Ford are going to do a big announcement in a few months. I can't tell you what's going to be, or I have to kill you, but we're around college completion, and they're going to be putting the pressure on. There's going to be a new national coalition of civil rights groups, employers, and labor folks who are going to be putting the pressure on higher education to say, folks, you've got to step up. We need your help. And so when you've got that kind of upswell, then when you can connect and say, you know what, scholarship teaching and learning has a lot to contribute to all of this, and communication as a player in the college scholarship teaching and learning has a lot to contribute, not just about learning communication stuff, but about learning, because we do, as Sherry said, we study teaching as a communicative act and with a focus on learning. So,
can I kind of say what I think I hear you saying?
Sure, say it about
could I do that? I'll probably, me, I'm not very eloquent, right? And I'm hearing you say that there are all these learning objectives and goals being defined and set for higher education, right? And some of them are very specific and they're communication related, but others are like completion and adult learners. All of these are out there, and that what we here need to do is figure out the role of communication in achieving those, yes? Right. We have to say, okay, what does communication bring to that? And it is the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning that does that, is the initiative that does that helps to examine and enhance communication's role in achieving those goals and learning objectives, correct? It gives us a spot, doesn't it?
Yes. The work you do at the University of Wisconsin, I'm sure, is contributing. How does that contribute to the University of Wisconsin having the gaps between majority and minority states in the University of Wisconsin?
Lori.
Great. I have never heard such a concise, even though it's long, but concise summary that is so energizing of what's happening in the big picture. At the same time, the opportunity is coming, so I haven't said it yet, right?
Okay, no,
At
but
the same time, I direct a teaching and learning center,
Yes.
and I fund SOTL projects, and I work hard to make sure that even the novices to first time they've had human subjects, that there's some rigor there, and we grow them through all kinds of programs and what have you. But their interest across the disciplines, including our own, comes from a challenge in the classroom. It's very much not big picture at all. And when that individual faculty member who finds a challenge in the classroom and then finds a way to address it and then studies whether or not that way of addressing it, that innovation affects student learning or not, when that individual faculty member is transformed, is re-energized by that process, we call that faculty development. We think it serves learning, and it can be an absolutely beautiful thing. But it is almost always completely, I was going to say divorced, but it was never married, to the big picture. And I think the communication opportunity is to get those connected. So we know how, as communication scholars, to foster collaboration. We know how to deal with things like the stereotypes that are held that keep faculty from participating in AAC&U, or who keep faculty from attending something with the word assessment on it because of the stereotype they hold that that's just, VSA, that's like the F word on our campus. Seriously, that is completely different than I love learning, I love students, I want to do a good job, this kind of scholarship is going to help me. And so I think the communication opportunity is to be that bridge between that, the national initiatives and the local classroom concern actually are aligned. But those who are engaged in the scholarship don't necessarily see that alignment.
Well, and I guess I would say vice versa. I don't think some of the people that are seeing the big picture are looking at the importance of the learning in the classroom as contributing to that big picture. So I think, when we work on our campus and we try to connect scholarship of teaching and learning to campus initiatives or even system-wide initiatives, the people up here don't get how that works. So when we talk about completion, the learning in the classroom should be one primary reason students stay in school, that they feel like they're learning, right? That they know they're learning and they're moving forward. But no one's looking at that. We're counting how many leave and how many stay, and we don't know why. There may be financial reasons, but I think a primary reason is that students feel like they're learning.
And actually, we found out, I am interrupting, but one thing we've discovered is it's a relationship with a faculty member that makes them stay. Or if they finish, that's what they remember. It's one faculty member who was a phenomenal teacher and impacted the learning of a human being, and that's why they complete.
Yeah, so that's the learning.
That one-on-one relationship is related to this huge, big picture, and getting them connected, getting those connected, may be our opportunity as communication.
And maybe studying more systematically, especially at the public school level, and I'm keen in that area primarily because we lose so many students before they get to the university. But something dreadful, I think, is happening in the classroom, and I don't quite know what it is, but I think it means something very significant to me, that you could have 50 to 60% of high school students dropping out. What's going on in those classrooms that would make these students feel the way they feel. And perhaps we need to be talking about a melding of external things as well as things that are happening inside the classroom. Because it's a huge, huge, huge challenge.
I would agree. I understand it's kind of a bottom-up, top-down process.
Sure.
But let me go back. They're a shrinking and rapidly shrinking minority of students in American higher education are first-time, full-time students living on a campus who are having these deep relationships with faculty.
True.
The vast majority are part-time adult students coming back for a variety of reasons.
Or online.
Online, well, yeah, coming back in different ways, blended learning, whatever. So I think a huge question for the scholarship, and we're not doing very well at getting those students to where they want to be. I mean, they're coming back. I mean, they didn't go because their parents told them to or because everybody else in their high school went. They're coming back at some considerable sacrifice to their families and themselves and their pocketbook. And we're not doing a very good job of providing them the learning that they need to improve their lives. And you think VSA's an effort, try employability as a word. That's another that we care about employability. But the point is, so I think a huge area here is if you don't have that, with that reality in mind, we need to understand better how to help those students learn what they need to know. But they have their goals. They have their things they want to do. So I just don't want us to lose. Sometimes I think we slip back, and I do too, because I came out of a very traditional, research university, blah, blah, blah. And it's very easy to slip back and let the whole enterprise be defined around full-time, what we all know, what we all did. And that's not American higher education today. But I do think the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning should be at the forefront of helping us figure out, since we don't do it very well right now, how do we help those students, the majority of students in American higher education, get to where they need to be to have better lives and be better citizens.
I agree. And an investigative, am I out of order here?
No.
An investigative part of that, from my perspective, will be this whole notion of attention. Because I think attention spans, we need to focus on attention spans and the whole notion of...
I pay attention all the time.
Yes, I know, we do. But students, how to, and the interplay between attention spans and popular culture and scholarship of teaching and learning. The notion that things are supposed to be rat-a-tat-tat, rat-a-tat-tat, rat-a-tat-tat. And in some instances, if students don't get that rat-a-tat-tat and get a rat-tat, they're gone.
They're out.
They're
then text messaging.
That's right. That's a very serious, I think, thing that we need to bring to this.
But I think that's more true of the traditional 18-year-old student than it is, I think, of the adult student that you're talking about. So, we have concerns in both places, but if our student population is not going to be the 18-year-old student, and we know very little about, and we don't know a lot about how they learn either, I don't think. And we don't know much about how anybody learns.
Don't wrap that one up and take it home.
But I'm talking about the 18-year-old. That was just my segue into that.
Yeah.
And it becomes out.
Isn't that sort of an indictment that we've been at this business for several hundred years and we don't know a whole lot about how anybody learns?
But it becomes then the role and the responsibility of scholar teachers who do the scholarship of teaching and learning and whose feet are planted in this discipline. This discipline, which is what it's all about. The failures that you're talking about, the shortcomings, partly happen because of communication, and they can be redressed through communication, which is what I see as the opportunity that we have right now to address those kinds of issues that we're all talking about.
Well, as I'm listening to you talking, I don't want to go negative in terms of this, but really the things you're starting to move toward are challenges. But as I'm listening to you, in kind of true Sodal fashion, when we see a challenge in the classroom, it becomes a question of significance for inquiry. Well, why is this occurring? So as I'm hearing you talk, adults and returning learners, attention spans, that all of these challenges, both in higher ed and in our classrooms, however we want to bridge it, communication is the bridge, and Sodal offers us the tools and language by which to study, communicate, and contribute to those larger conversations in some significant ways. So, I think I originally thought about this as, kind of strengths and challenges, but really Sodal offers us the two sides of the same coin. Any challenge becomes the opportunity for further study. So what do we know about traditional age learning, and does that hold true in an online course with adult learners? We would suspect maybe not, but we don't know. There's lots of opportunities for learning.
I've been reading a lot of literature lately about ways people try to get people to change the way they teach to more active learning and so on, and most of it comes out of science education, and the things that people have tried and failed are things that anybody
How funny, Erwin.
of that conversation.
Give us a for example.
Yeah. Come on. Tell us more. Tell us
I've
more.
gotten NSF grants for projects where they hand you a script after you've been teaching all these years and say, here, do this instead. And then they're shocked, just shocked that it didn't work.
I just have one comment as a newbie and entering, and being one of those adult learners that have returned to graduate school as an adult.
Oh my God, we have one here, Jim.
We've got one.
Come on up here, you. Come on up here.
But one thing here, we're talking, as I'm listening, there's a lot of discussion from the teacher side of it. But the paper that I presented, that I had the honor of having Sherry's comments and response to, looked at how the one thing that communication also provides when you're talking about opportunities and strengths is also how communication affects, how the student's communication affects their learning. Because I looked at how student communication about math and around math performance constrains or enables their changes for future performance in math. And it actually, and I thought about when you were talking about dropout rates and you're talking about the public schools and stuff, how we label ourselves and how we discursively frame as students then enable or direct our future behaviors. And that's an aspect of communication that also is a significant part of our learning.
And if we don't create these methods of study and gather this data, we default to standardized measures. I mean, I keep saying, the NESI is out, and so we're using that standardized measure, despite what some would say the limitations of that, as the measure of student engagement, with its communicative and other implications. And I think most of us would be like, well, it's a measure. I'm not sure that it's the measure, or necessarily even an overall great measure, but absent anything else contributing to the larger conversation, people default to it. It makes it much easier for things such as voluntary reporting and those sorts of things, comparative purposes, even though that was not what it was originally designed for.
You know, I'm really intrigued by this conversation because there are not so many of us here. And it's
6 or 7 minutes.
Yeah, it's like moving in a much bigger and better direction than what I thought. I mean, I thought that we would just sit around and talk a little bit about common scholarship of teaching and learning in a very pedantic kind of way. But I'm hearing like a real major national agenda. Yeah. This is like it's a national agenda. It's thinking really big about the contribution, and that's good.
You know, I think if we really are going to have an impact on some of these national issues, whether it's through AAC&U or it's through the things that you do or whatever, we have to organize. Yeah. I mean, we have to have a group of people who are going to say, what are we going to tackle? And how are we going to tackle it? And I mean, I think we should have maybe several of us or many of us tackling this on our campus, the same question, the same issue, whatever it might be. But I just think, I think, you know, Jim's right to a certain extent. If we all, and Lori too, if we all, it's great that faculty do these little things in their classrooms, but if we want to really have an impact, we have to move up, I think, to that level. And that's hard work. I'm not sure how it could be done. I think it could be done, but I think that's probably where we need to be.
But thinking that kind of big about what do we want to do? Okay, it's big. How do we do it?
I know.
And not being afraid of that.
I'm scared to death.
I know, she's scared. I know, it's going to be okay.
I'm scared, I'm just tired.
I mean, you're a little stunning.
I'm tired,
Let's talk about that. I asked you for resources and things, and before you leave, if you wrote some things down on your colored sheets that you're willing to share that I can compile, I'll be happy to collect it. But
they're so sloppy.
But
That's
I agree with, well, whatever, but I agree with Sherry. I think this is an important conversation, and so while we're here and we're thinking in this capacity, and then I will give each of you a chance to kind of have your one final thought as we go forward. But I mean, as we're brainstorming, what about an agenda for action? What would it look like? I mean, it's big, it's scary. We're getting tired just talking about it, but what might it be as we move forward? What are some of the things that we want to be thinking about as a basis or to work toward as an agenda? And maybe we're not quite there yet, but it seems like we're right on the cusp of it in terms of where the conversation left off.
Communication needs to be well represented at the ISORL conference in Milwaukee in 2011. And I think
we all want to go to Milwaukee.
Yeah. But
Let's
being
go.
strategic be strategic about the conversation, rather, as we prepare to propose things for that conference.
That's a good point.
What, globally, nationally, who are we going to invite?
Because that's the international scene for SOTL. So a presence there. Yeah.
And wouldn't it be lovely if we had, from this group, sort of a working paper that would evolve from our discussion here?
Like an agenda, maybe an agenda for a research agenda for what needs to be done to address all the vital concerns that Jim Applegate talks about. That would come out of CALM, that is calm and solid there. So, because I think presence in an initiative, and Brad knows this so well, and he's doing it really beautifully in the national office now. Presence in an initiative is really important.
It really is.
So we need a presence, and because you started out by saying international, international is where we ought to try to have that kind of presence and describe these sorts of things.
Well, you have a link. I mean, if NCA is working right as you are
with AAC,
with AAC and you on these rubrics and these
right.
learning outcomes, thinking about how you infuse into that.
Yeah.
It seems to me the logical piece is, okay, we've got these outcomes. How in the heck do we get students to those outcomes? And how do we get these kind of students versus those kind of students versus these kind of students? And what can we contribute to that conversation? Because that's got to, setting the outcomes is tough work.
Yeah.
So that's where you stop.
I think that's the next step. Go to AAC and you about that.
Well,
I'm sure Carol would be.
and to some extent, I agree that I think it is replacing AAHE. As we look at what AAC and U is doing with what they call their high impact areas, if you look at what those are, the experiential, again, they tend to be inherently very communicative in terms of instructional, service learning, experiential. So who should be coming to the table? But again, we can be contributing not just in rubric form, but in terms of what does this look like?
I think we also need to document what we already know, organize it, and disseminate it. So what have we learned from the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning in the communication discipline in particular, and more broadly if we have more time and energy and money. But what have we already learned? And let's organize that and disseminate it in a way that's accessible. So if somebody wants to know about collaborative learning, they want to know because they're in a national initiative, or they want to know because they're in a classroom and it's not working. We should provide that resource and that organized. So that
which is presented would contain what we already know and our projected research agenda, linking it to AAC and new kinds of things. Isn't that the idea?
That's a huge project.
Yeah, it's a huge project.
That's very IDD.
It needs to be done. Yeah.
As we wrap up, I'm going to ask each of you, as we look forward in 5 years, final thought, final advocacy, final whatever. Brad, I'll start on your end, and we'll work on down.
No fair.
Sorry. Okay, Carolyn, would you like to start?
I will just say very, very quickly that I read a book called Smiling Through the Cultural Catastrophe by Jeffrey Hart. And in that book, he says that liberal education should invite and encourage students to, quote, recreate Western civilization. We can add any kind of civilization we want, international knowledge, etc., if need be. And so from my perspective, I would want to know how this communication through the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning helps students to achieve that.
Here's a challenging agenda item. Sherry, your thoughts? Final thought?
My only final thought is reactions, of course, to this really good conversation. That I now have a clearer idea of some of the future directions, which would involve linking with the goals of higher education, looking at what those goals are, figuring out the role of communication in achieving those, and that would include what Laurie brought up, what we already know, and a research agenda for what we think we can continue to bring to the table in the future, and that would be extremely exciting. I'd also like to see more rigor in the quality of the work. I mean, it's just an aside. I think more rigor in the quality of the actual studies, and maintaining those links to NCA. Because NCA, it shouldn't be just the STL folks going scampering off. It's got to be linked, and we're fortunate to have Brad involved, so we can continue to have that imprimatur on this work.
May I be excused because you have guests?
I'm not going to say anything because I think I already said it. I think if we're going to do this, we got to get organized. We've got to have a champion that moves us forward, and I don't know if we have that, but I think we need that.
I think in our connections to AHCNU that we look to other places to go as well, such as Political Science Association, sociology, to talk with our peers in other disciplines, because this is interdisciplinary work and it deserves different perspectives.
As we continue to have perspectives on looking for a champion, the Social Business meeting is next. 5I. So hopefully we'll be there and we'll talk about where we're going. Thank you all so much for not only attending,
And
but
you, Mary Ann.